The fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show. It is Friday evening. Another interesting week in the ongoing saga, tragedy, I don't know what you want to call it, of coronavirus in the world, in America, in the world in which we live. All right, so I figured today we'll talk a little bit about what's going on right now in terms of the coronavirus, and then talk about what's the implication of this long term? What does this do to the world in which we live long term? How does this change things? How does this what's going to happen on the other side of this? Where are we going to be once this crisis is over? What lessons do we think we're going to learn? Unfortunately, you're not getting the optimistic Yaron Brook tonight. So 3-hour show tonight, Kyle says. No, you got to be crazy. I actually work for a living, right? This is like the end of the day. I'm not staying on for 3 hours. It's one of these days. You know, if you pay me enough, I'll do 3 hours. It's all a question of dineros. Well, actually dollars, because I wouldn't want to take dineros. So it's all a question of money. Yeah, for the right amount of money, I'm happy to stay on here and talk for 3 hours. I have somebody said the other day, you have a gift for gab, and yes, I can talk for 3 hours, answer your questions for 3 hours, and just make stuff up for 3 hours. So, yes. Stefan and Kyle, all those who advocate for a 3-hour show, pony up the cash. That's what I would say. All right, so what's going on with coronavirus? Pretty spooky, I have to say. If you really think about this, on the virus side of things, 101,657 identified cases. That I think is indicative of the fact that we're actually testing now. So we're actually getting some accurate reads on the extent to which Americans have coronavirus. My guess is that in terms of actual cases, there's well over probably 500,000, maybe a million. Maybe a million people already that have the virus. Some of you might already have it and you don't even know, or the symptoms are so mild you'll never know, unless we start releasing the test for the your blood, and test to see if there's a antiviral response. They test antibodies, and then they can tell if you've already had. So at some point, hopefully, they'll be releasing tests that will tell whether you've already had the virus. But over 100,000 people now in the United States testing positive. And it's pretty much all over the United States. I mean, I'm looking at a map here, and it looks like there are a few pockets where nobody lives, where the virus is not being identified, in the deserts, in western Texas, in North Dakota, and places like that. But generally, the map is pretty red in terms of where the virus actually has been identified. And of course, what you'd expect is that it's very dense in cities. So you're getting it around Seattle, San Francisco, Los Angeles, even San Diego and Orange County, Houston, Dallas, Chicago, New York, Miami area, and Boston, all the way down to D.C. So heavy concentration of corona. Virginia is not virus free. I mean, just James City, Virginia has 55 confirmed cases and 2 dead. So the 101 confirmed cases, we've got 1,581 total dead. The number of dead is rising significantly, dramatically from day to day. You'll start seeing it really growing exponentially now. Already 366 dead just in New York City. quite a few in the surrounding counties. Clearly, New York City is kind of the epicenter of this. Oh, New Orleans is cases in New Orleans are rising significantly for whatever reason. Jefferson County in Louisiana, where I think New Orleans is, already has 24 dead and 548 identified. But if you look at the counties around Jefferson County, it's that whole area is red. So there's a lot going on in New Orleans. They argue that Mardi Gras, there was a lot of spreading going on during Mardi Gras. Again, if you look at the numbers of who is dying, then what you will find is, as we've talked about from the beginning, most of the people who are dying from this, most of the people who are landing up in ICUs because of this, are indeed, people who are 65 and older, primarily 80 and older, and then people who are younger who have a variety of different pre-existing conditions. Somebody's asking me if I want to interview Governor Lincoln Chaffee on my podcast. I just got this on Facebook. It popped up as a Facebook thing. I guess I'll have to do a little research and figure out. Oh, by the way, that reminds me. If you want something uplifting, if you want something positive, I think really interesting and fun, I would definitely recommend you listen to my interview with Matt Ridley, the rational optimist. I thought the interview was really good. Remember, he's not an objectivist. He's definitely bought into certain altruistic and collectivistic premises. My purpose in the interview was not to challenge him on that and not to educate him about it, but to really dig deep in terms of what his book is about, which is about innovation. So I highly, highly recommend you listen to the interview and you buy the book. The book is definitely worth reading from the little I read. But anyway, I encourage you to look at that. All right, so as I said, a lot of death, a lot of positives. 1,581 death doesn't sound like a big number, but if you think about how you project that out into the future, if you think about how that is growing and it's growing exponentially, that number could get into the hundreds of thousands, and you could see hundreds of thousands of Americans dead in a very short period of time, a relatively short period of time, because of this virus, and because, I'd say, not just because of the virus, but because of the pathetic, irresponsible, ridiculous response of the Trump administration to this virus. I see people defending Trump and defending his response. I see it all over the place. I put up today on Facebook an article criticizing Trump's whole attitude towards this from the beginning, and the danger and the damage that it has done. And oh my God, you'd think that I had accused Jesus of being immoral, which I do sometimes, but I think Donald Trump is more beloved and more sacred and more treated as the Son of God than Jesus Christ is. I could do an article criticizing Jesus Christ right now and put it up on Facebook, and I would get less criticism than I do criticizing Trump. And of course, here is the first commentator accusing me of having Trump derangement syndrome. No, Trump is just an awful, horrific, terrible president who is to a large extent responsible for, he is the president of the United States, so he's responsible for the weak, pathetic, awful response of this government to this virus, and some of these deaths, not all of them, but certainly some of these deaths are on his hands. What partially is amazing, though, is that people approve of his handling of the coronavirus. 60% of Americans approve of his handling of coronavirus, and I'll get to that because that's one of the reasons I am so pessimistic about what's going to happen after this. Is the fact that Americans are just accepting of this president, accepting of the way he's dealt with this, the way the governors have dealt with it, the way the government has dealt with this, and indeed I think their view is only gonna be more positive as more action is taken, and that's tragic. Instead of learning the lesson here that this is a complete and utter government failure, and that if only the private sector had more to do, if only we really had capitalism, if only our leadership was actually led us instead of playing politics with this. And if only our leaders actually did what was necessary in order to protect us and defend us, if only, then, but people won't learn because they're not even recognizing the fact staring them in the eye right now. Somebody asked if I'm self-isolating, staying inside. Well, I mean, I'm abiding by the law. Well, not really, but I'm mostly staying indoors because Puerto Rico is under, we have this, we've been told that we have to stay indoors, and we can go out to pick up food, we can go out to the grocery shopping, but we're not allowed to go exercise, take walks and things like that. So I take a walk outside. I've actually gone to visit friends in about 30 minutes away, which is illegal technically, and I could go to jail for 6 months for doing it. But these are silly government regulations that that assume that I'm a moron and don't know how to behave. But the fact is, the government we have a curfew. I'm not violating the curfew because I do not want to spend the night in a Puerto Rican jail. But there is a curfew from 9 p.m. and starting next week, the curfew will start at 7 p.m. Anyway, things are scary, at least in certain parts of the country. I mean, New York and certain hospitals are running out of supplies. It is really, this shortage of hospital beds, again, caused mainly by government regulations. The shortage of hospital beds has, people are feeling the pain right now. Again, people are going to die because of shortage of beds, shortage of ventilators, shortage of supplies, and the courageous men and women in the medical profession who are working unbelievable hours and unbelievable effort, and they have to stay really focused. I'm hugely admiring of their ability and their willingness to do this kind of work and to engage in this kind of work and do it well. But they are putting their lives on the line in a sense, because without the kind of protective gear, they're likely to get this. And given that their immune system is suppressed because they're not getting enough sleep, given that some of them are older, there is a good chance that they will get sick and potentially die. So that's kind of on the front, and it's terrible. And again, while I think this is avoidable, I've suggested what I thought needed to be done. I don't think that what is happening in the world right now justifies shutting down the U.S. economy, justify forcing everybody inside, instead of actually thinking about this, focusing on those who are most vulnerable, protecting those who are most vulnerable, isolating, or in the words of Amesh Ajala, cocooning those who are most vulnerable, separating them from society, and letting the rest of us get with life, produce, create, build. Instead, we're forcing everybody into isolation, which is pretty pathetic. But it's somebody says 100,000 deaths isn't scary. We can't live forever. We can't live forever. It doesn't mean you want to die now. Of course, you can't live forever, but I don't want to die now. Do you want to die now? That's a pretty pathetic attitude. No, I don't want to die from a stupid virus. I want to live to be 150, not die now. I'm way too young to die. So, no, 100,000 deaths is scary, and it's sad if somebody is dying, and it's sad just generally to think of the waste of human life that is occurring right now, and that it's at least some of these deaths were preventable. So. On a global scale, the numbers have now exceeded. Whoops! Why am I not getting the right numbers? Yeah, almost 600,000. By morning there will be 600,000 cases of coronavirus globally. 27,200 deaths. Italy now has the most deaths in the world from the coronavirus. And that is 9,000. By tomorrow, it'll probably be around 10,000 deaths. It's interesting that the countries that have done the right thing, like Germany, South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, are seeing numbers that are far, far lower than these numbers. So Germany, in spite of having many cases, Germany has almost as many cases, half the cases of the United States, but only 342 dead. So half the cases of the United States, yet a fifth of the number of people dead. And that is a consequence of them doing it right. Testing, isolating, testing, tracking, isolating. Testing, tracking, isolating. That's what you do. Germany's done that. South Korea's done that. Taiwan has done that. Singapore's done that. Hong Kong has done that, and they've been much more successful in dealing with this virus than anybody else, who's basically the rest of the world has shut down their economies. The only other country that kind of is not shutting down is the Netherlands. By the way, Germany's not shutting down, so things are open. Netherlands are not shutting down, although they have a large number of deaths. So we'll see what happens in the Netherlands. Spain is a mess. France is a mess. Sweden hasn't shut down, so it'll be interesting. And Sweden is taking a very different attitude than some of its other Scandinavian neighbors. Sweden is relatively keeping things open, not shutting down its economy. It has 3,000 confirmed cases with 105 deaths. And good for Sweden for not shutting down the economy while it's doing it. Denmark and I think Norway have. So it'll be interesting to see the different outcomes, economic outcomes and healthcare outcomes that result from this. All right. Let me say again that if you haven't watched the interview I did with Matt Ridley, you should definitely go and watch it. It's one of my best interviews. I think it's one of the ones I enjoyed the most. It was just fun because we were talking about positive things. We were talking about innovators and innovation, and you should buy his book. The book is truly I mean, I haven't read the whole thing. I read about half, and it's really good. It's really good. Stories are fantastic. He's a good storyteller. All right, so that's what's happening on that front. On the political front, today we got a $2.2 trillion. And I want to emphasize the 0.2, because $0.2 trillion is actually $200 billion, which is $200,000 million. Rounding error in a $2 trillion stimulus package. Can you imagine all the stuff that's in the 0.2 trillion? I mean, what did they put in there? Nobody's read the bill. Donald Trump signed it today. I can guarantee you neither he nor Mnuchin read the bill, and certainly not Peter Navarro. None of them read the bill. 900 pages. 900 pages. No congressman or senator read the bill. I mean, a bunch of staffers got locked up in a room somewhere and wrote this monster. Probably staffers from different offices wrote different sections of it and then put it all together. Can you imagine the pork, the bridges to nowhere, the garbage, the nonsense, the favors, the bribes, the corruption that is inherent in this bill? Because think about it. If you give somebody $2 million and bury it in this bill, nobody's going to see it. Nobody's going to find it. I mean, in a $2 trillion, $2 million is nothing. It's penny change. Nobody's going to care. Now, this is the point we've come in America and in the world more generally. We have no, we throw money at things. We have no appreciation for that money. We have no appreciation for the work it takes to create the wealth from which that money comes from. $2.2 trillion. It's a truly unimaginable number. And yet, it passed the Senate unanimously. Nobody voted against it. Now, I don't know how many people voted against it in the House, because I think it passed by a vocal vote. So, the yays had it because there were more of them. The only congressman I know that probably voted against it was Congressman Massey, because he got hell for trying to actually get people to vote for it rather than a voice vote, actually get them to press a button so we could count the votes. He failed in succeeding in that, and Donald Trump, our president, harassed him for it and actually demanded that he be thrown out of the Republican Party for actually slowing down the bill by actually requesting that people actually vote on it so we know who voted yes and who no for this monstrosity of a bill. Not only is it sending money to people, checks to people, which is probably the best part of the bill, unemployment insurance, your benefits, are going to be higher for some people than what you actually earned in a job. I wonder if that creates perverse incentives. I don't know. Maybe not. I'll let you figure that one out. I mean, we're giving out bailouts, $500 billion to bail out different industries. Can you imagine? I mean, every congressman has a cousin who has a business that's probably struggling right now. My hedge fund is struggling right now. I want a bailout. Where do I sign? Where do I fill out the forms? How do I get a bailout? I mean, I can guarantee you that I don't get a bailout. But if I was related to somebody in the Senate, my guess is we could probably talk. I mean, the corruption here is so absurd. And then, of course, $180 billion for hospitals. Now, why is Congress putting $180 billion in a hospital that is not going to be ready for the coronavirus? It's going to take years to spend $180 billion on hospitals. So what are we going to do with that $180 billion in hospitals? Well, in my view, it is step one towards nationalization of the hospital system, which is step two in the process of giving us universal health care run by the government. I mean, this is absolutely pathetic. Number 7 says, what is your brilliant response, Yaron? Well, the brilliant response can't be to take $2 trillion out of some people's pockets and give it to other people's pockets. That's the response? That's what you're buying? I mean, even people who follow this show have become statists and collectivists. Because, oh my God, there's a virus. My answer, I've been doing shows on the coronavirus for 2 months. And I've given my answer. My answer is, don't shut down the economy. My answer is, isolate the people who have the disease. Let everybody else go to work. You don't have to bail out an economy when you're not forcing people out of jobs, when you're not shuttering restaurants. My solution is, deregulate. And if we're going to do a stimulus package, my solution has always been send checks to individuals. Don't bail out businesses. Don't give politicians the ability to bail out some businesses and not others. Take $1 billion, take $1 trillion and write checks to individuals and let individuals make choices on how to spend that money. And that way, you don't distort and pervert the economy. So, Mark Collins, I've been talking about my solutions for a couple of months now. So don't put all caps. Oh, Yaron Brook, you have no solutions. Give me a frigging break. The solution is not to give more power to politicians who have created this disaster, who have put us in this situation. The solution can never be to give up on our rights, to give up on our freedom, to give up on capitalism, and to embrace and to support the growth of government, increased regulation, increased control, and the cronyism that a $500 billion paycheck to business is going to involve. I'm no philosopher king. I want to give people a check. These guys are the philosopher kings. Yaron Brook does have all the solutions. Absolutely, Derek. Instead of giving the philosopher kings in Washington, D.C. $2.2 trillion to play around with, to figure out what they want to do with it. Send checks to the American people. Let them decide what they want to do with it. If you're going to do any kind of stimulus, and it's not clear we need a stimulus, if you don't shut down the economy. Even Governor Cuomo yesterday said, maybe it was a mistake to shut everything down. I don't know if you saw this clip, but he basically said, I don't know if we'd really thought about it, if we'd really consider it, if shutting down the New York economy was the best thing. I mean, the fact is maybe, and Trump says, I want to get America back to business. Maybe politicians are starting to listen. Maybe not to me, because I don't know how many people listen to me. Even you guys don't listen to me. But maybe to Amesh Ajala, who wrote this brilliant piece about how we don't need to shut down the economy to deal with this. And he's an expert. He's not like me. He's a real expert, a medical expert. And he said we don't need to shut down the economy. Maybe people are starting to listen to him. I mean, they might even be people I hear in the White House listening to this podcast. Maybe all my arguments against shutting down the U.S. economy or the world economy, maybe it's starting to filter in to the Comos and to some governors and maybe even to some people surrounding Donald Trump. Somebody once asked me years ago, Yaron, what is the most frustrating thing about your job? And I said honestly, and I'll say it again, and I'll say it right now, and I know this is unbelievably arrogant, but it is absolutely true. The most frustrating thing about my job is that I know how to solve most of the problems in this world, and nobody listens to me. That's what's frustrating. And even the people who follow me here half the time are not listening. But these problems are solvable. We have the answers. The philosophy, the framework that Ayn Rand gave us is a framework, a philosophy that solves these problems. And I might not get everything right, and my answers might not be right, but it's along the lines of my answers because the methodology is the right one. It uses reason, and it focuses on freedom, and it focuses on the individual, his right to pursue his own happiness. And if you just think in terms of government actions, what should one do if one valued the individual's right to pursue his own happiness? Then 90% of what government does would not get done. Why would I run for office? What would be the point in running for office? So that my voice can be silenced at a political level? What would be the value of running for office? Now, let me just say, if I ran for office, what would the level of success? 0. I would be beaten in a landslide. Who the hell is going to vote for me? It's so easy to say run for office, but think about what that means. Think about what you would say I would go out on running for office. I'd go on the campaign trail, and I'd say if I was elected, I would vote to phase out Social Security and Medicare. And by the way, I think billionaires are amazing. I love billionaires. And I think if only billionaires had more power in this world, we would be in much, much better shape. Todd, thank you. Todd says he's made a very generous contribution. He says, please order takeout after the show. I missed meeting you in Philadelphia, but look forward to seeing you soon. I can't order takeout now because by the time the show ends, I'll be under curfew. Because we all live now in basically police states. And all the restaurants that do takeout all close their doors at 6 o'clock by decree of the government. And next week, curfew starts at 7. I have to get home to bed really, really, really early. 7 o'clock, I'm not allowed to be out. My masters don't allow it. Where is this outrage? I feel it, but where's your outrage? That some politician tells you when you have to go home, that you can't go to work, that some politician is telling you what you can and cannot do, that you can't go sit in a restaurant. Now, maybe it's not good for you to sit in a restaurant. maybe you should stay home. And certainly if you have a disease, and certainly if you are over 60 years old, you should stay home. And by the way, if you're carrying the virus, then the government has a duty, a responsibility to make sure you don't leave your home. And if you do, then there's a jail where they can board you until you get better. But there's my emergency alert just went off on my watch, telling me, reminding me that the curfew is still in effect from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Every night, this crazy alarm goes off on my phone and on my watch telling me this. I mean, the job of government is to identify those who have the virus and to isolate them, not to force you and me to be isolated. Maybe they could recommend it, and maybe you and me would choose to isolate ourselves, but that should be your choice. Your values, not the philosopher kings in Washington, D.C. or in Albany deciding what your values should be, how much risk you are willing to take. Most medical professionals say we should stay at home. Fine, stay at home. But by the way, not all medical professionals think that. A significant number of them don't think that, but many of them, according to people who speak to me, many of them won't say it publicly. Because if you look at how much Amesh Adalja is being harassed out there, they don't want that harassment. They don't want that harassment. Mark is still complaining that I have all the answers. I do. I mean, an argument is not to say, Yaron, you have all the answers. Contradict me. Show me where I'm wrong. That is the only way to do it. All right. By the way, if you want to ask a question, Super Chat is open. Let's see. I do want to address one other issue happened this evening that I think is very indicative of some of your favorite president of all time, Donald Trump. Trump announced that he is invoking the Defense Production Act, that he's actually putting it to work. He invoked it a few days ago, but said, "Oh, I'm not going to actually put it to work. Let them, I don't need to. The markets can figure this out," which was admirable. Although why he ever invoked it. By the way, for those of you who are really scared of this act has been invoked like 50 times since it was passed in 1950 during the Korea War. It's used for all kinds of things. Donald Trump actually used it in 2017, June of 2017, to provide technology for the space industry. So this is a way that presidents basically take a bunch of power in order to force the private sector to do what they want. It requires that private companies accept and prioritize contracts from the government, and that they prioritize materials, services, and facilities to promote the national defense or to maximize domestic energy supplies. So it's usually to ramp up military productions. Now guess who? Guess who is the czar of the Defense Production Act? The guy put in charge of all this. And don't say Wesley Mauch, because that was a novel, and Wesley Mauch is not a real character. But if you could think of a human being in Washington, D.C. that resembled Wesley Mauch more than anybody else, who would that be? And by the way, a economist, in quote, who I have been riling against, and again, you can't accuse me of just making this up, because you can go back and check my podcast. I've been riling against this person since Trump was elected. And this person is Pina Navarro, the University of California, Irvine, pseudo-economist. I've met him. He is, in my view, a complete and utter idiot. He is one of the worst economists ever. I mean, Paul Krugman is several degrees better than this guy. He is anti-trade, hates trade. He wants to make all supplies that we fight this virus made in America, which would slow down the fight on the virus dramatically. The masks, by the way, are mostly made in South America, even though the cotton has to be, by regulation, made in America. That's Peter Navarro for you, which slows down the process. Again, blood on his hands. Blood on his hands. He is now, Wesley Mouch, a.k.a. Peter Navarro, a thug, is now the czar of the Defense Production Act. He is responsible for coordinating our efforts in coercing private businesses to accept government contracts to engage in building whatever the government deems it is an emergency to develop. Now, it's interesting why Trump actually suddenly used this act. Because up until this afternoon, there was supposed to be a deal between the federal government and General Motors to produce ventilators. And then somebody at the White House, who knows, maybe Peter Navarro, decided that General Motors' prices were too high. I'm shocked that a company would charge the federal government high prices. I mean, when the government just passed the stimulus package of $2.2 trillion, it would be a sin not to charge high prices from the government. Anyway, so Trump got really angry. GM was fleecing him. And of course, we know that you guys have told me over and over again that Trump is a master negotiator. So I thought Trump would fly out to Detroit or fly the CEO of GM to Washington and negotiate with him, right? That's what you do. You negotiate to get a better deal. But that's, of course, not what Trump does. He's a lousy negotiator. He's a horrible negotiator. So instead of that, what did he do? He invoked the Defense Production Act and basically told GM, make ventilators. You have to. It's law. You can't turn us down. You cannot negotiate. You have to do it because I just invoked this law that coerces you into doing it. So there you go. Now we have General Motors will be making ventilators starting tomorrow, not because they want to, not because they got paid the price they required to make it, but because Donald Trump is coercing them, forcing them, as usual. The central planner in chief is organizing production in America. And we've seen how well that is done. I mean, testing. I mean, think about the federal government's ability to promote testing early on in this epidemic. So, yes, the government is using coercion to force private industry to do the government's bidding in fighting this virus. Now, if this isn't economic fascism, I don't know what is. It is the control of the means of production by government, not the ownership. It's not socialism. It's not communism. It's not about owning the means of production. It's about controlling the means of production. That's where we are. That's where this president has brought us. That's where this political class has brought us. On the verge, well, economic fascism on an even grander scale than we had before this epidemic. Okay, so I want to talk about the future, what I think is going to come at the other side of this. Right? But in the meantime, let's take a few questions. Is shutting down the economy just an excuse so they can bleed the economy of wealth and install communism? No, I don't think so. I think it's panic. Our politicians are panicking. People are going to die. People are going to blame them. And the only way, there's a theory There's a real interesting economic theory, which is flawed, but it still has a lot of interesting insights. And basically the idea is this. It's called public choice. And the idea with public choice theory is that at the end of the day, politicians have incentives too, and politicians and regulators and bureaucrats functions based on incentives. And if you understand the incentives of politicians, then you can understand the decision making. And what is the incentive of a politician? What is the incentive of a politician? Well, the incentive of a politician is to get reelected. So when a crisis happens, in the beginning, you deny. Why? Because you hope that nothing will happen, that the crisis will pass, nobody will notice, or that it'll spread out into enough time so that it happened after the election. And this is exactly what Trump did, remember? Oh, this is just a flu, no big deal, don't worry about it. I've got it under control. When there were 15 cases in America, we were going to go down to 0 very soon. He downplayed this dramatically. That's what you do. That's what regulators always do. That's what bureaucrats always do. And that's what politicians do. That's phase one. Phase two, the crisis, everybody knows is here. It's inevitable. It's right here in front of us. Nobody can deny it. So now, what am I supposed to do as a politician? Well, now I use all the powers I have. Now I overreact dramatically. Because now I want to be seen as acting, as assertive, as, somebody who knows what they're doing. This is Como, right? Presidential, nice office. Go out there and act. Shut down the economy. And that's the incentive. And of course, at this point, I'm afraid. At this point, I'm uncertain. I don't know what to do. People are going to die. I might get reelected. I'm going to get blamed. So I need to act and now if I act, and even if I overreact, who's going to tell me I overreacted? My excuse, if somebody says I overreacted, I say, oh, listen, if I hadn't done that, 10 times more people would have died. Now prove him wrong. There's no way to prove him wrong. There's just no way to prove him wrong. So, all these governors didn't do it because they're trying to institute communism. I mean, there's no governor in the United States who's a literal communist. Many of them are more fascist than communists. America will never become socialist qua socialism. It is much more likely to become fascist, and we're seeing that. They're not going to take over private property. They're going to manage. They're going to control private property. So, no, this is a consequence of the incentives politicians have. It's a consequence of the fact that the only thing they know how to do is use force, use coercion. That's government. Government is a gun. Government is coercion. Government is force. It's a hammer. All you have is a hammer. All you have is force. What can I do? I'm the government. Have to do something. There's a virus. Have to do something. Okay, I'll force people to stay home. And then Como, because of the criticism, is now kind of, in moments of weakness, backtracking. Okay, at what point do we need to get violent? Do we need to get violent? Well, the only point where it makes sense for us to get violent, I assume in an effort to make the country freer, I assume in a revolution like the founding revolution that would bring us that would resurrect a constitution, hopefully a better constitution than what we have, and based on a Declaration of Independence. So violence, not just for the sake of violence, but violence for freedom. I think we reach a point where we need to get violent when we think we can win. There's no point in engaging violence and losing. And I think we're far, far, far from the point where we can win. So, and by the way, I still think we have a voice. And as long as we have a voice, as long as we can speak, as long as we can argue, as long as we can debate, then we have an opportunity to change the world. Okay, are anti-reason and anti-happiness philosophies dominant? Or do most people want happiness? I don't see it. So I think I think we live in a combination, in a society that is at odds with itself philosophically. So the philosophy, the explicit philosophies, the explicit ideas are primarily anti-happiness ideas. The guidance we get philosophically, morally, live for other people, don't let people suffer, don't let people, and look at this crisis. Don't let, we have to sacrifice everything, so that one old person won't die. I mean, that's absurd. I mean, Governor Cuomo actually said that in one of his press conferences. That's an anti-happiness philosophy. On the other hand, we still have remnants of the Enlightenment. We still have the vague general idea that we want to be happy and we want to be successful. This is why the self-help section in the bookstore is so big. People are still looking for ideas on how to become better, how to live happier, how to be more productive, how to succeed, how to be good at living. There's still that remnant of Enlightenment ideas in our culture that still bubbles up to the surface once in a while. So we're split. On the one hand, our philosophy and our moral code is anti-happiness, anti-life, anti-success, anti-prosperity. And it comes up really in politics. And on the other hand, we have just a sense of life. This is what Ayn Rand called a sense of life, a non-conceptual idea. That, but I should be happy. I should live well. I should be successful. I should have a career. And you see a lot of Americans in particular pursuing those things. And what you see is this constant contradiction, constant internal fight within their soul, which of course doesn't help them become happy. Instead, what they should do is read Ayn Rand, read her nonfiction, read The Virtue of Selfishness, embrace a morality of happiness, a morality of living life on earth, starting with the use of your mind, the use of reason, and embrace that. And then they can be happy without that conflict, without that contradiction. They can pursue their self-help in ways that are productive and reinforcing. They don't have that constant battle within themselves. Do you think the ramification of the Defense Production Act will be the economy, on economy trade? Look, this particular act is really, really bad, and his doing it is really, really bad. But it's 50 times it's been used in the past. I think there's a broader question. I think the question is, how do we come out of this virus? What are people going to learn from this virus, from the perspective of government? And I think they will learn all the wrong lessons. They will learn that the only way to deal with a virus like this is to give government more control. They will learn that the only way to deal with this virus is for the government to take control over the economy. And indeed, generally, they will learn that the private sector cannot be relied upon. Because that's the stories, this is in spite of the evidence, that the private sector is the only sector that can be relied upon. The story and the message that they will be told over and over again is that government rode in and saved us. That it's Donald Trump forcing General Motors, because General Motors wouldn't do it voluntarily to make us whatever, has saved us. Now, ignoring all the companies that have converted their assembly lines to make the stuff that is needed in hospitals voluntarily, they'll ignore all that. Generally, we're going to come out of this crisis with the American people having much more respect for government. And I think the most devastating thing coming out of this crisis is that the pressure to nationalize our healthcare system will grow exponentially, dramatically. Indeed, I predict that if Trump gets reelected, Trump will nationalize our healthcare system. Republicans will give us universal healthcare and nationalize our hospital system. One of the lessons that people are going to draw from this crisis is hospitals didn't have enough beds. You see, this is what happens when you have for-profit hospitals. Now, then ignore the fact, and indeed, other countries have more hospital beds than we do per capita. Instead of looking at the facts, which is that what has driven hospital beds to where they are today is Medicare and Medicaid and state regulations. For example, the state of New York has put pressure on hospitals in New York to cut the number of beds to become more efficient because the government is paying so much of the hospital bills. So government is what has driven private hospitals to the point where they don't have enough hospital beds. And instead of seeing that, we won't see it. Just like we didn't see that government caused the Great Recession of 2008, we won't see that government made us so vulnerable to this crisis. And what you will see is a consensus across both political parties. And what the Republicans will do is that we'll have some kind of universal health care with a semblance of some private insurance or private something. Whereas the Democrats will want, the government should own everything, control everything, and so on. So that the Republicans will say, yes, but we're the party of free markets because we still have a little bit of private property here. But there's no question in mind, the biggest victim of this virus, other than, of course, the people who are dying, is going to be our healthcare system. Our healthcare system is going to be nationalized out of this much faster than otherwise. And all I can say is, my heart goes out to the doctors who are on the front line right now and fighting this virus and risking their lives to a large extent to fight this virus and not sleeping. And then when this is all over, instead of being rewarded, they're now going to become, government employees, which is going to decimate the profession. So that is my prediction in terms of where this leads us in the next couple of decades. More trust in government and the American people, and a greater belief that we need the government to be involved much more in healthcare. And you're already seeing that. This all proves that we need. The fact that that Italy, which has socialized medicine, is not coping. Facts don't stop these people. It doesn't matter. People are dying. The private sector supposedly didn't do what was necessary. Therefore, it must be government. There's no other option. Altruism and collectivism demand that. All right, so another question. I'm seeing the right-wing pundits use a lot of the same propaganda to fuel anti-Chinese China sentiments, like they did leading up to the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Is war with China around the corner, in your opinion? No, I don't think so. China is not Iraq. Iraq, at least you knew we could win easily with few casualties. China is not like that. I think we could win. I don't think China could. But oh my God, it would be a devastating war. Remember, China has nuclear weapons. China has 1.3 billion people. What would a war even look like? Would we literally occupy China? No, there's not going to be a war with China. But again, if we're thinking of where we are after this comes out, we're talking about much less trade with China, many more restrictions on trade, lots of tariffs. Generally, the country is going to be ready, and you're already seeing this, for many more tariffs, much more made in America, much more anti-American, we've got to build everything here. And again, counter to the facts. This is all counterfactual. So, the solution to the coronavirus is not that each one of us become a subsistence farmer. The solution to coronavirus is not that we stop globalization. On the contrary, the opposite is true. If tariffs were lower, if free trade flowed better, then when China recovers from this crisis and we're descending into it, we could be getting supplies from China. Just as our production is going down, their production is going up. And the same is true globally. If we had even more free movement of goods between us and Mexico, then Mexico, which I don't think has a real severe case of this. Let me just check Mexico. Mexico has 585 cases and 8 deaths. Then Mexico could ramp up production as we're declining. The beauty of globalization, the beauty of international trade, the beauty of the flow of goods across state lines, is so underappreciated. and indeed has kept the United States economy going for the last 30 years. Without China, we would be a decade at least behind in economic development from where we are today. We would be substantially poorer than we are today. So I think that the outcome of this crisis, again, will be further demonization of China. And in some respects, China should be demonized. We should be putting pressure on the Chinese government to get rid of wet markets, which I think they just did. I read somewhere that they just did. They passed a law that getting rid of these wet markets, these wet animal markets. And we should be putting pressure on them to deregulate and to open up and to stop their awful human rights activities. But of course, we're not doing that. We're obsessing about stupid trade issues and manufacturing, who manufactures what and why. And, but we should basically have zero tariffs with China and zero tariffs with Mexico. Now, it's true, Mexico is barely testing, but the fact is that very few people are dead as well. So what happens is, just like in the United States today, people are testing sick people in the hospital. So you can tell how much the virus is prevalent in a place, not so much by just the numbers they're reporting, but also by the number of dead. I mean, we should be testing everybody. I mean, ideally, every single person in the United States would be tested, and then we know. I have the virus, I don't have the virus. I had it 2 weeks ago, and I have the antibodies. I've never had it, there's an argument to be made, and I'm not an expert, so don't take me at this. There's an argument to be made that we should encourage young people to get the virus. We should have, you know how you used to have when you were kids, you used to have chickenpox parties? There's an argument to make that if you can distance young people from old people, if you can distance young people from sick people, then we should encourage young people to get the virus so that we establish herd immunity. And I was just telling my wife today that, let's get it over with already. I mean, we're probably going to get it at some point in the next 18 months. Why? Once we get it, we won't have to wipe everything down. We'll be immune to it. So there is an argument to be made that, we should test everybody, see exactly who has it and who hasn't had it. Isolate the people who are particularly sensitive and particularly, would be affected horrifically from this, and actually let everybody else live semi-normal lives and let them have it. I mean, the fact is that a vaccine is very uncertain, that even the 12 to 18 months number is very uncertain. I mean, this comes out of my interview and actually in the book with Matt Ridley, is the fact that the vaccine development technology is still very primitive. It's still, even though we can DNA sequence the virus, we still don't know how to build vaccines, even without the FDA. This is really, really tough science, and we haven't really cracked the science. And it's so to wait and sit around and just wait for a vaccine is probably not a good strategy, because it's going to be a long time. We need a strategy to deal with this without a vaccine. All right, let's see. What else do we have here? Yaron, do you have any advice on how to convince people that there is a better process than shutting down all of society to mitigate the risk of COVID-19 disease? Ideally, the more who agree, the more get communicated. I mean, everything I've said, I don't have any advice on how to convince people any more than what I've already told you. So take what I've said, try to boil it down to what you can communicate, and try to get it. I mean, if what I'm doing and you're doing, and of course, there was a good piece in the New York Times last week, there was a good piece in the Washington Post last week, all arguing we shouldn't shut down the economy, all making good arguments. In the New York Times, in the Washington Post. And of course, you've got Amesh Adalja arguing there, who has credentials and who's a really good writer and a good thinker and is actually out there on the front lines presenting these arguments. Then that's what needs to be done. And you guys need to support that. And you guys need to get it out, share it, like it, do the things that you have to do on social media to get the good articles. And I put them all up on Twitter, by the way, like this New York Times article. Get it all up there. Get it all up onto the social media so people are exposed to it. Should Trump use this bill to ensure American kids do their chores? Absolutely. It's about time that we coerced American kids to do their chores, particularly if their chores involve, massive social utility and the good of the country and the good of the state and the good of Trump. Now, I'm kidding, of course. I don't know. I assume that was not a serious question. No, it is not the role of government to tell kids to do their chores, and it's not a role of government to tell GM to make ventilators. It is not the role of government to force production. It is not the role of government to intervene in the economy. It is the role of government to protect our rights, to protect us from people carrying the disease, not to protect us from one another. Have you looked at the Australian economy? We had 30 years without recession. We're about to be decimated. Our economy is consumption, mining, and housing, and all will collapse. What should we do? I mean, I haven't looked much at the Australian economy. I do know you have not had a recession in 30 years, but you haven't had spectacular growth either. Your economy is very much dependent on mining and natural resources, and you mainly supply China with those things, and so you're very sensitive to the Chinese economy collapsing. Your economy is not so much based on consumption, but on services, and that's fine, and that's a good economy. What Australia needs to do is what every economy needs to do. You can't avoid economic shocks. They're going to happen. Coronavirus is going to happen. You take the shock, and you try to come out of it better on the other side, which is the opposite of what's going to happen. You want to come out of it freer, and therefore energized to create, build, make, and grow the economy dramatically. So what should you do? Cut regulations. Cut government spending. No stimulus. Cut government spending. Get out of the way. Shrink government. Cut taxes. Get capital into the hands of individuals. Cut taxes. Shrink government spending. And obliterate regulations. That's what you should do. I said that after 9/11. I said that after 2008. I'm saying it now. Nobody listens. Nobody cares. Doesn't matter. All right. Thoughts on remdesivir orphan status issue. So first, I have no thoughts on remdesivir. It's a drug. I don't know if it works or it doesn't work. Nobody knows if it works or it doesn't work. They haven't done the testing. They haven't figured it out. We don't actually know. Now, I know that President Trump and a lot of other people have emotions about this, have feelings about the efficacy of some drugs, and have anecdotal evidence about these things. But I don't know, and neither do they, until they're tested. So I don't know what the status. Now, orphan drugs generally, I think doctors should be allowed to use them. Doctors are smart. They know the medical literature. They should be allowed to use orphan drugs. I mean, they should be allowed to use any drugs, not just orphan drugs, unapproved drugs. They should be able to do whatever the hell they want. And then suffer the consequences. They should be liable for what they do. But they should be able to prescribe whatever they think will cure this. Not what the regulators think, not what the government thinks, but what doctors think. And they should follow scientific process. They should follow scientific evidence. But using orphan drugs has often been very valuable to people and has often resulted in cures of diseases or the mitigation of symptoms. So, I'm encourage people to experiment. And look, this is happening because the FDA actually allows orphan drugs to be used. So what is happening right now, for example, is artificial intelligence companies, big data companies, are taking data on the DNA sequence of the virus, and then taking the database of all drugs and trying to figure out, using different algorithms, which drugs do you think might have an effect on this virus? And then we take the ones that are matched up best from a computer's perspective, and then you go and test them. Orphan drugs are drugs that have been approved by the FDA for use for disease X. But let's say a doctor thinks, or scientist thinks, that they might be relevant for disease Y. Hasn't been tested yet, but let's say disease Y is getting out of control, like coronavirus. They can use this drug that was approved, and the reason they can use it is because part of the approval process is that it's safe to use, that you're not going to die from using it. So you can use this drug for this disease. It might not help, but it's probably not going to cause harm because it was already approved by the FDA. That is the logic behind, that's the idea of orphan drugs. Okay. Let's see. Would you recommend I establish a Galt's Gulch? I don't know you, so I'm not going to recommend one way or the other. I mean, who are you to establish a Galt's Gulch? Where would you do it? How would you do it? Do you have the technology available to do it? Can you hide? What does Galt's Gulch even mean to you? So I can't answer that question without knowing a lot more about you and what you mean by Galt's Gulch. Most of the people that I've talked to in the past, who've wanted to establish a Galt's Gulch were nuts and had no clue what would be involved. Thoughts on conflict between DIY, do-it-yourself solutions, and IP. I guess I'm not sure what that means. I mean, I'm big on IP and intellectual property. I think intellectual property is necessary for progress, but I also think that people should be able to do for themselves whatever they want. And I guess I don't understand the real context of the question. So whoever asked this question needs to formulate it, flesh it out, so that I can. Otherwise, I don't know exactly what it's about. Before the virus, my father signed a contract agreeing to purchase a home. He wants to get out of it because of Corona. Do you agree? We are in Quebec. I mean, it depends on the contract your father signed. If your father signed a contract that gives him the right to get out of the contract because of, I don't know, what's called acts of God, acts that could not have been foreseen, something hitting the world or the economy or Quebec or your house that could not have been foreseen. If there is an out, then yeah, it's legitimate and it's legal. But if the contract says, no, you're buying the house, the way it is, and no matter what happens to the world, it's your house, then there's no way you can get out of the contract, and there's no moral way to get out of the contract. So the answer to the question is, depends what the contract says. Please talk about the evil of Corona triage. What is Corona triage? Man, you're coming up with concepts. I don't know what they are. What's Corona triage? So maybe you can elaborate. Okay, you guys have no idea the value these get-togethers are to me personally. Oh, great. Great mental relief for me. Thanks, everyone. Thank to Yaron and other objectivist streams like this. Keep it up. Good. I'm glad that there is real value that some of you are receiving from this. All right. I mean, if there are no more questions, I think that'll do it. I'll remind you again to go watch the interview I did with Matt Riley. I mean, it's a great video. I think you'll really enjoy it. Triage is who should have a ventilator. Okay, I'll get to that in a second. And watch the video. The book is excellent, and the interview is really good. It's enjoyable. It's fun. It will not be the kind of it will not, in a time where all the news is depressing. This will get you up. And please pre-order the book. It's really important to pre-order books. It helps the rankings. It helps promote the book. It helps the book get into kind of the bestseller list. So please go out there and buy the book and pre-order the book. And Matt Ridley is just a great guy. And while again not an objectivist, he doesn't agree with us on everything. And he's infected with some collectivism and altruism. He is one of the good guys. He promotes progress. He promotes human flourishing. He promotes success. He's quite friendly with Alex Epstein, so he promotes the right attitude towards energy. And he is generally one of the good guys. And we should support the work of the good guys. There are not enough good guys in the world in which we live right now. All right. Let's see. Triage. So triage can happen under two circumstances. It can happen because of rationing, which is the result of government action, which limits supply, which to some extent exists in all socialized medicine, and to some extent exists in the United States because the government has limited medical supplies and limited what hospitals can or cannot do and cannot stock for years. So triage, as a consequence of rationing by government, is evil. It is the choice of who lives and who dies. By what criteria? By the criteria of, it's hard to come up with a criteria. I guess in Italy they're doing it if younger gets to live, older gets to die. But you can't imagine that even in situations that are completely private, that are completely free market, in a virus, in an emergency situation, in an accident, where an ICU is overwhelmed and you can't treat everybody, the doctors are going to have to make a decision between who gets treated and who doesn't. So triage is not always evil. It depends on the circumstances and it depends on the cause. If the cause is government, it's evil. If the cause is external. But if the cause is just overwhelmed, then it's just a hard decision that doctors need to make on who to treat and who not. And I think young versus old is one of the factors, healthy versus sick. I mean, underlying healthy versus sick. Have kids, not have kids. I mean, all kinds of things where the doctor's going to have to evaluate who he thinks, has greater value in life. And you hate to put a doctor in that. But money can't always decide because it's an emergency room. You haven't figured out who has insurance and who hasn't. But let's say all the people there have insurance. And all the people there would cover the treatment. But it's an emergency. This is why it's an emergency. And in an emergency, it can't be money. And it's not going to be money. You don't know how much the insurance company will cover and how much will not. But in an emergency, most insurance companies will cover everything. So everybody's covered by insurance, but you have 100 patients, you can only treat 50. 50 are going to die. Imagine a terrorist attack in a particular place that has one hospital. And there's suddenly ICU is overwhelmed with 100 patients. They can only treat 50. Tough choices have to be made. That's part of being a doctor. And these choices are made when there's traffic accidents, when there's fires, you can't save everybody. And it's not just money in an emergency. It's money over the long run. But in an emergency, it's not just money. If you can't get takeout, what's for dinner? Well, I got takeout, but I got takeout earlier, and I've already eaten dinner. I can plan these things. I got takeout earlier. It wasn't very good. A restaurant that produces good food when you sit down, but the takeout food is just not up to snuff. So it's a challenge. And we're knocked down for another 2+ weeks, 2 weeks and 3 days. And I have a feeling the quality of the food is going to deteriorate. But I just discovered today that a Fogo de Chão, Fogo de Chão, Brazilian steakhouse, which makes great meat. There's a Fogo de Chão like 2-minute walk from where I live. I mean, literally, the Fogo de Chão sign I can see from the windows in my home. It's right there. I can almost touch it. They have takeout. I didn't realize this until today, and that's going to make a big difference in my life. I can just cross the thing and get some great Brazilian steak. I love Brazilian steakhouses, particularly in Brazil, but they're also good in America. Have I seen the film Agora? Yes, and it's excellent. It's about the philosopher, the female philosopher, whose name, of course, escapes me right now. And it's very anti-Christian. It's not very historically accurate. Let's put it that way. It's not historically accurate. But in its antagonism towards Christians and its portrayal of Christianity's antagonism towards science and knowledge in that period, it's very accurate. Hypatia. Now, we don't know the exact history of that period. We don't know the exact history of the burning of the Library of Alexandria and Hypatia and what she actually did and what she didn't do. The history is very spotty. So this is a dramatization based on that spotty history. And I really, really enjoyed it. So I would definitely recommend it. She is a true heroine. It's a sad movie, but she is a true heroine. And what happens there, well, if that doesn't make you hate Christianity, One of the many, many factors. Oh my God, somebody's figured out where I live. I guess there's only one. There's only one Fogo de Chao in San Juan. That's right. That's right. So you know where I live now. Oh my God. I hope I don't have demonstrations outside the condo tomorrow. So we've got people listening to the podcast from Puerto Rico. That's kind of exciting. Where do you live, Eddie? I'm curious where you live. You live in San Juan or you live out in somewhere else? All right. Anyway, thanks all for listening. Don't forget. By the way, thank you for the very generous super chat today. Some of you went above and beyond, so I really appreciate that. Thank you for the support of the show. Thank you, all of you, for supporting the show. Eddie lived in Condado, which is in San Juan, but now lives in California. I went the other way around. Left California, moved here. Thank you for supporting the show. Those of you who don't, please do. It's becoming more and more important, and the show and your support to it. And, of course, don't forget to like, share, and you can support the show. I'll be announcing a new platform, as if we need another one, but a new platform, a platform that Dave Rubin has launched, where you can support the show off of that platform, and we're going to start consolidating everybody to the new Dave Rubin platform over time. All right. So unfortunately, we did not get enough money raised from the right people to do a 3-hour show, because it can't just be random money. It has to be from the money from the people. It has to be from Kyle, from the people who actually want a 3-hour show. Some of you gave money, and I don't know if you want a 3-hour show. Maybe you don't want a 3-hour show. So the 3-hour show people have to. It's called Locals. The platform is called Locals. So we are on the Locals platform. I'll start giving you info about it, maybe the next show, and so on. So it's called Locals, and it's a platform that Dave Rubin has rolled out, and you can support the show on there by using Stripe instead of PayPal, which I think a lot of people prefer because PayPal has been politicized somewhat. And Jack says, they would pull out their fingernails during a 3-hour show. I don't know how to take that. Anyway, we're not doing 3-hour shows. All right. I'll see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern Time. I'll be doing an open kind of Q&A with my supporters. So it'll be the regular cast, or maybe some irregular people, some people who are not regularly on Zoom with me, asking me questions. We'll take some super chat questions. We'll take some other questions. Should be fun. So that'll be the show tomorrow, and we might do a show on Sunday. So instead of 3-hour shows, we'll just do a bunch of shows. Yeah, Jennifer's going to be on the show tomorrow on the Zoom, and I'm sure there'll be, I think Jonathan is going to join her, and there'll be others. So we'll get a nice mixture of great questions, and it'll be fun. And maybe I'll order some steak, and you can all watch me eat the steak. Oh, wow, Travis, that is amazing. Thank you. That is amazingly generous, and I hope you don't expect a 3-hour show because of that. All right, guys, I will talk to you all soon. See you tomorrow. Bye.